Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open one of the most oddly specific and consistently bizarre patterns in all of mythology. Why the king of the Greek gods? Zeus himself kept turning into animals to get his way. You've got swans, bulls, eagles, golden rain, and even a goose in there, which we'll politely side-eye later. Picture it now, you're walking through an olive grove in ancient Greece. Cicadas hum lazily in the dry summer air. The marble columns of a half-forgotten temple shimmer under the heat. Everything smells like thyme and sun-warmed stone. And somewhere in the sky, Zeus is prepping for yet another shape-shifting scheme, which will absolutely end in someone getting turned into a tree, a bear, or a very confused constellation. And here's the kicker, you probably won't survive this. Not in the mortal sense, at least. Because getting involved with Zeus, especially when he's pretending to be a bird, rarely ends in a calm chat and a polite handshake. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're joining from somewhere far away, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts, of course, with a bird. A swan, to be exact. Not your average backyard pond creature, but a glowing, majestic, overly confident swan who somehow floats down from Mount Olympus and flaps into the mortal realm looking for love, chaos, both. Zeus was known for many things, throwing lightning bolts, maintaining a complicated family tree, and having the attention span of a distracted toddler in a thunderstorm. But perhaps nothing defines him more than his creative approach to romance. And by romance, we mean very questionably consensual mythological side quests. Take the swan situation. The most famous bird moment comes with Leda, a Spartan queen, who was either bathing or walking along the river, depending on which poet you ask. That's when she was approached by Zeus, in the form of a swan. A majestic, elegant, glossy, feathered swan being chased by an eagle. Because apparently that was the plot twist Zeus thought would work this time. Now, this scene has been painted by Renaissance masters and embroidered into tapestries for centuries. But let's be honest, it's one of the weirdest seduction setups in literature. Historians still argue whether the original myth was meant to be read symbolically, representing power, purity, fertility, or just a convoluted celestial joke. But the end result is always the same. 2 eggs. Yes, eggs, depending on which version you pick. Greek myths are conveniently flexible. Leda lays 1 or 2 eggs from which emerge some mix of children, including the famously beautiful Helen of Troy, her sister Clytemnestra, and the twin brothers Castor and Pollux. Imagine explaining that family tree at dinner. So mom, how did I hatch? Well, sweetie, one day I met a swan who was secretly the thunder god. And remember, this wasn't an isolated incident. Zeus was just warming up. The animal disguises only escalated from here, each more baffling and elaborate than the last. It's not just mythology, there's something fundamentally odd about how often Zeus chose to ditch his all-powerful thunderclouds in favor of feathers and fur. Scholars have suggested that maybe it was about domination or symbolism, or simply that Greek storytellers really enjoyed mixing high drama with farm animals. Others point out that these myths reflected an attempt to explain divine parentage without making the gods seem too human. Turning into an animal added a layer of mystique and plausible deniability. But let's return to Leda. Her story leaves us with a jumble of questions. Why a swan? Why eggs? Did the Greeks really think that made sense biologically? Was this myth a coded explanation for real-world politics, royal lineage? Or just an excuse for ancient playwrights to get weird? One fringe theory even suggests that the swan story might predate the familiar Greek pantheon, that it stems from pre-Hellenic bird cults or fertility rites. Which frankly is the most Greek thing ever. Take an old bird ritual, sprinkle in a thunder god, and voila, now it's divine. What's important to remember is this Greek myths were rarely told for consistency. They were fluid, regional, often contradictory. Leda's swan encounter might mean one thing in Corinth, something else entirely in Athens, and be completely ignored in Sparta, where everyone's too busy training for battle and eating boiled pork. But the story stuck. It stuck so well that it traveled across centuries, across cultures. You can still find it referenced in paintings, poems, and even modern literature. Because there's something hypnotic about it. The imagery, the strangeness. The fact that even in the grand chaos of mythology, this one feels especially surreal. So as you drift further into this sleepy maze of Greek mythology, remember, Zeus, king of gods, and bad decisions had every possible disguise at his disposal. And the very first one he chose was a swan. You wake to hooves. Big, heavy, deliberate hooves plodding across a dreamscape of olive trees and distant surf. There's something oddly regal about this creature. Its horns curved like crescent moons, its back broad enough to carry a throne, and its eyes just a little too knowing. Spoiler alert, it's not your average cow. It's Zeus, again, this time he's a bull. And unfortunately he's here for Europa. Now, Europa is no random name. She's a Phoenician princess known for her beauty grace, and the extreme misfortune of being incredibly Zeus's type. You're walking along the beach with her sand warm underfoot, the Mediterranean, glittering like a giant bowl of spilled wine. And there, standing in the shallows, is a snow-white bull. He's perfect, suspiciously perfect. Europa's attendants, who clearly skipped Stranger Danger Day at finishing school, admire the bull. They pet it, they laugh, they marvel. And Europa, curious and charmed, eventually climbs onto its back. The bull winks, and then books it across the sea. Like full gallop, water spraying, hooves, skimming the waves level booking it. He carries her all the way from the shores of Phoenicia to the island of Crete, where Zeus reveals his true form and presumably says something like, "Surprise, I'm the thunder god," and also kind of terrible at boundaries. The result of this interspecies road trip is Minos, the future king of Crete builder, of the labyrinth, stepdad to the Minotaur, and proud grandson of a kidnapped cow. It's quite a legacy. Mainstream historians agree this story isn't just mythological madness. It may reflect early cultural exchanges between the Minoans and Phoenicians dressed up in divine drama. The bull was a sacred symbol in both regions, and Crete in particular had a rich bull-centered culture, from frescoes to rituals like bull leaping, think ancient gymnastics, but with more potential goring. Fringe theorists, of course, suggest this myth masks some sort of political alliance, or even a real historical abduction. Or they suggest that the bull is symbolic of the sea itself, powerful, majestic, and unpredictable. But let's not kid ourselves. The takeaway most people remember is Zeus turned into a cow and ran away with a girl on his back. The absurdity of it is part of what makes it so enduring. There's something dreamlike about the whole thing, like a fable that got wildly out of hand. No one questioned the logistics. How did Zeus's bull swim for that long? How did Europa not fall off? Did she get seasick? Did he moo? Myth conveniently skips those questions. What sticks instead is the image of a girl on a bull's back crossing an endless sea, her hair flying behind her like a banner. You watch them from the shore now, small as a pebble in the distance. You wonder what she's thinking. Fear, wonder, confusion. Probably all of it. And you wonder again why Zeus keeps doing this. Why animals? Some say it was cunning. Animals can move unnoticed. They disarm suspicion. Others argue that animal transformations were a sign of Zeus's complete control over the physical world. Why limit himself to one form when he could become anything? But there's a weirder theory, a more uncomfortable one. Maybe Zeus, despite his power, didn't want to be recognized. Maybe this wasn't about dominance or deception. Maybe it was about hiding. If the king of the gods is caught behaving badly, yet again it reflects poorly on Olympus. Maybe a swan or a bull was just a way to avoid divine HR paperwork. "Not me," he could say later, sipping nectar. Must have been some other thunder god with transformation powers. Regardless of motive, the Europa story leaves its mark. Literally, the continent of Europe is named after her. That's how deep the myth runs. You imagine Europa settling into Crete, building a life, raising royal sons, and occasionally glaring at passing livestock with deep suspicion. Because even after the drama fades, the story remains. There's something about Zeus's animal forms that lingers like a strange scent. They're not just disguises, they're narrative tools. Each creature chosen to match the vibe of the myth. Swan for elegance, bull for strength. Eagle for? Well, we'll get to that. But the bull episode cements one thing. Zeus isn't just toying with mortals. He's reshaping landscapes, politics, and entire dynasties with his bizarre barnyard tactics. You sit back imagining the great halls of Crete echoing with royal footsteps. Somewhere beneath them, Europa's story is carved into the stone. And somewhere above on Mount Olympus, Zeus is probably planning his next transformation. Spoiler, it's about to get weird. You're in a tower now, tall ceiled and utterly devoid of windows. The air is heavy with incense and the faint echo of your own breathing. Somewhere outside, seagulls call lazily to one another, but in here you might as well be in another world. This is Danae's world. She's a princess, the daughter of King Acrisius of Argos, and she has the rare misfortune of being at the center of a prophecy. A seer once told Acrisius that his grandson Danae's future son would one day kill him. Most people would maybe set some emotional boundaries. Acrisius, in full mythological overreaction mode, built a bronze prison tower to lock his daughter inside and prevent her from ever getting pregnant. Because that always works. Now you're sitting beside Danae, who has resigned herself to a life of celibate solitude accompanied only by her maid, the occasional breeze, and a very low chance of anything interesting ever happening. Enter Zeus. He takes one look at this locked-away maiden, and because this is Greek mythology and subtlety is in a strong suit, he transforms himself into golden rain. Yes, rain, but sparkly. This isn't a metaphor, or at least not just a metaphor. Zeus literally melts his essence into a cascade of shimmering particles and pours himself through the roof like an extremely ambitious chandelier. And that's how Perseus is conceived. Historians still argue whether the golden rain is symbolic of divine light, agricultural fertility, or something less PG. Some ancient sources treat it seriously, others more cryptically. Renaissance painters, bless them, went full sparkle mode, depicting Danae reclining in soft fabrics as golden glitter rains down upon her from a well-lit ceiling crack. It's mythological nonsense, but with flair. And yet behind the weirdness, there's something deeply eerie about the story. A woman locked away by her father, only to be visited by a literal storm of fate. It's as much about destiny as it is about divine antics. You step back from the scene. Danae's child Perseus would go on to slay Medusa, rescue Andromeda, and accidentally fulfill that pesky prophecy by throwing a discus that oops kills Acrisius. A mythic told you so if there ever was one. But it all starts here, with the rain. It raises the same strange question again. Why does Zeus keep choosing these bizarre forms? He could just appear as himself, kingly radiant beard blowing in the wind. But again, he chooses something else. Something poetic or strange or slippery. Golden rain isn't just camouflage, it's transformation for effect. Unlike the bull with Europa, this moment isn't public, it's private mystical. The form Zeus takes reflects the setting. He's not strutting on a beach. He's flowing into a prison. He becomes the only thing that could bypass solid walls without breaking them, light water divine essence. There's an uncomfortable brilliance to it. And also a recurring theme, Zeus bypassing rules. Not breaking them, just finding a workaround so clever and ridiculous that no one can figure out how to stop him. Of course, Danae doesn't get much say in any version of the story. That's another pattern. The women in these myths often become vessels of fate carriers of important heroes and divine lineages, but rarely do they have the chance to opt in. You wonder if she told anyone after it happened, or if she just pointed at her belly a few months later and shrugged. You wonder what it's like to raise a child born of light, to tell him bedtime stories that begin with, "So your father is a thunder god and also technically precipitation." The story spreads as all myths do. It becomes theater, sculpture, verse. Danae becomes one of many women visited by Zeus in creative forms, and every artist takes a turn trying to make sense of the golden rain. Some show it as radiant coins, others as streaks of divine power. A few go with glittery waterfalls because sometimes you just commit to the aesthetic. But the myth never disappears. It clings to the collective imagination. Maybe because it's so strange. Maybe because it's so ancient. Or maybe because we all secretly love the idea that something can slip through cracks, that no prison is airtight, that even the most carefully constructed walls can be undone by the smallest, most magical intrusion. Danae's tower doesn't last. Neither does her silence. And as Perseus grows, shiny hair, curious eyes, a glint of thunder in his voice, you can almost hear the gods whispering. There he is. The storm's legacy. It all began with golden rain and a girl alone in a tower. You're high above the earth now, soaring on invisible currents of air, the wind cold and sharp against your feathers. Yes, feathers. strong golden ones that glint slightly in the sunlight. Your talons curl instinctively with each shift of the breeze, and your eyes, much keener than a mortal's, scan the land below like a god looking for a good story. Because you are. You're Zeus again, this time in the form of an eagle. And your sights are locked on a shepherd boy. His name is Ganymede, and he's minding his business on the slopes of Mount Ida, tending his flocks with the quiet grace of someone who doesn't yet know. The king of Olympus is flying toward him like a mythological Uber. Ganymede isn't famous yet, but he's beautiful famously so. Even Homer calls him the most beautiful of mortals. And unfortunately that puts him on Zeus's radar, which, as we've learned, is not great for personal boundaries. So, you Zeus eagles swoop down from the heavens, grab Ganymede mid-lunch and fly him straight to Olympus. Just scoop him up like a surprised goat and vanish into the clouds. The story takes a softer turn here, at least in some versions. Ganymede is granted immortality, becomes cupbearer to the gods, and essentially joins the celestial inner circle. He even gets a place in the stars as the constellation Aquarius, forever pouring water or wine depending on who's telling the story across the sky. Historians still argue whether Ganymede's tale is a noble elevation of a mortal into divine service, or something more troubling. The myth walks a line between reverence and discomfort, especially when viewed through modern lenses. Was it about love, power? Was it a metaphor for mentorship, or simply divine indulgence dressed in feathers? Either way, it follows a familiar rhythm Zeus sees. Zeus transforms, Zeus takes. Only this time, instead of seduction or disguise, the story is about abduction. No tricks, no sweet talking, just an eagle-a-boy and a fast flight. And in some tellings, Ganymede doesn't complain. He pours nectar, learns divine etiquette, and settles into his new role. But in others, his father, back on Earth, King Tros, mourns his son so bitterly that Zeus actually feels a flicker of guilt. An emotion the god of thunder is not well acquainted with. To make amends, Zeus gifts Tros a team of immortal horses, which is a very Zeus thing to do. You take a boy, replace him with horses. Everything balances, sort of. The image of Zeus as an eagle becomes iconic. Not just in this myth, but as a broader symbol. The eagle appears on Roman standards, American currency, and countless national flags. It becomes a shorthand for divine authority, royal power, and, let's be honest, dramatic flair. But beneath that symbolism is still a story of a boy who looked up and saw a shadow with wings. You picture Ganymede now seated at the edge of Olympus. He's pouring nectar into golden cups, his eyes scanning the stars he now lives among. Maybe he misses his flock. Maybe he's content. Maybe he wonders what his life might have been if a god hadn't wanted a new assistant. You wonder what Zeus thought looking down at the earth after the whole thing. Was it pride? Satisfaction? Regret? Maybe it's none of those. Maybe, like the weather he controls, Zeus just moves on storm to storm, myth to myth, right? But the eagle form lingers. It shows up in other myths too, not always as Zeus himself, but as his sign, his animal, his emblem. Because there's something perfect about the eagle for Zeus, majestic, untouchable, deadly when provoked. You imagine the other gods watching the Ganymede episode unfold. Hera perhaps raising a very judgmental eyebrow. Apollo whispering snide commentary. Hermes passing notes. Olympus is divine, yes, but also deeply dramatic. And maybe some of the immortals start to wonder if Zeus can pluck a mortal from the ground and hand him a cup who's next. You leave the scene drifting upward, following the stars until Ganymede's constellation takes shape. A boy forever pouring sky water from an urn, glowing faintly with the warmth of immortality and the weight of being chosen. In the end, the eagle is just another costume in Zeus's ever-growing closet, but it's one that says a lot about power, about flight, and about the things we lose when the gods decide we're interesting. The feathers are back, but this time they're sleeker, glossier, and somehow flirtier. You're lying on a quiet riverbank now, warm stones pressing gently against your back as a breeze rustles the reeds. The light is golden. The water is calm. Everything is perfect in that soft, too perfect to trust kind of way. And then you see it. A swan again. Déjà vu, right? But this isn't Leda's swan. Or maybe it is. Myths love to fold into each other like badly organized laundry. Regardless, it's floating across the surface with unsettling elegance, a ripple of white against the green-blue current. You turn your head slightly, and beside you is Leda again. Yes, the same Spartan queen from earlier. Only now things are muddled. Some say she's alone, some say she's with her husband King Tyndareus. Some say this is before the egg-laying incident, some say after. Greek mythology really doesn't do timelines. But here's the thing, this version of the story is where the confusion multiplies like rabbits. Or rather, like swanlings. Because this time, Zeus again in swan form woos Leda on the same night that her mortal husband does. Which means the resulting eggs... Yes, eggs contain a genetic cocktail of both godly and mortal parentage. It's the ultimate divine paternity mystery. From these eggs, depending on which mythologist you ask and how much wine they'd had hatch. Helen is in of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Clytemnestra, future murderer of her husband. No biggie. Castor and Pollux, the original Gemini twins. Some versions say they all came from Zeus. Some say Castor was mortal and Pollux immortal, which is complicated for sibling dynamics. Others split the parentage right down the middle like a mythological timeshare. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects real ancient beliefs about divine ancestry, or if it's just what happens when oral traditions become a communal storytelling free-for-all. One fringe theory even posits that the egg imagery points to Eastern or Anatolian mythic influences after all. Not every culture hatches its heroes from bird eggs. But let's return to that riverbank. You watch the swan still gliding past like it owns the place. Its neck curls in a perfect S, its wings parting the water like silk. There's something both silly and regal about it, like it's trying very hard to pretend this is all normal. Because nothing about this is normal. You wonder what Leda thinks in this moment. Is she enchanted? Confused, bored. She's often painted as passive in later art reclining on cushions. Swan cuddled awkwardly beside her, but Greek myths don't give us much of her voice. She's remembered mostly as a means to an end, the mother of famous children, the starting domino in the saga of Troy. And yet her story is one of the most enduring in Greek mythology. Poets return to it again and again. Painters can't resist it. Swans have never fully recovered. There's something magnetic about the absurdity of it all. Zeus, king of gods. Top of the celestial food chain still refuses to just be himself. Instead, he folds himself into this elegant, awkward bird, and in doing so leaves behind one of the most iconic myths in Western literature. You imagine the eggs again resting in a royal basket rocking gently. A nursemaid peeks in and does a double take. Babies in eggs from a swan. Sure, why not? It's Tuesday. The swan glides away eventually, as swans do, probably to go ruin someone else's domestic tranquility. You're left with questions and feathers and a newborn goddess of beauty, who will in a few decades bring about one of the bloodiest wars in myth. All from a riverbank. All from a bird. Zeus's animal disguises aren't just tricks, they're triggers. Catalysts. He enters a scene, shifts the world a few degrees, and leaves. And the humans are left to clean up the aftermath. And sometimes, as in Leda's case, they're left to raise it. As night falls on the river, you watch the stars emerge tiny lights against an ink-washed sky. You wonder if Castor and Pollux are already up there, blinking down in twin formation. You wonder how many myths started just like this. A quiet place, a strange animal. A moment of divine interruption. And somewhere far above Zeus, still in swan form, probably thinks he's done nothing wrong. You're on the move again this time, not in the sky or on a sea-slick beach, but along a dusty, sun-drenched plain. The grass is scorched, the cicadas are screaming like they're auditioning for an opera, and in the distance, a single cow is staring blankly into the horizon. That cow is not just a cow. You guessed it. It's Io. This one's a tragedy. And not the poetic kind that ends with some dramatic swoon and a beautiful funeral pyre. No, this is the slow burn identity crisis. You might never get your human face back type of tragedy. Io was a priestess of Hera, which already makes her off limits in the divine dating pool. But Zeus in classic fashion looks at Io and goes, I'd like to complicate her life. Now, depending on the version of the story you've accidentally wandered into, Zeus either seduces her, loves her from afar, or brace yourself, gets caught mid-visit by his wife Hera. Which is awkward, even for gods. So what's Zeus's solution? Panic transformation. He turns Io into a cow. Not a sacred, glowing celestial cow. Just a cow, which, understandably, does not improve her day. And here comes Hera. sharp-eyed and suspicious, who very clearly is not buying this random cow wandering through the palace routine. She politely read passive-aggressively asks Zeus if she can have the cow as a gift, and Zeus, cornered by his own weird choices, says yes. This is where things go from weird to wildly unfortunate. Hera assigns Io a babysitter. Argus Panopta is a giant with 100 eyes scattered across his body. This guy's entire resume is never sleeps. Even when some eyes nap, others stay open. So Io, now a full-time cow with a part-time stalker, starts wandering across the landscape, mooing softly and dreaming of opposable thumbs. You follow Io's journey across the ancient world. She crosses rivers. She climbs hills. She walks all the way to Egypt, mooing the whole time. Along the way, she carves literal landmarks into geography. The Ionian Sea is named after her, as is Bosporus from Bows, meaning cow, and Poros, meaning passage. Io's hoofprints leave mythological cartography in their wake. Historians still argue whether Io's myth was a coded tale of migration, a symbolic agricultural story, or a bizarre explanation for Egyptian-Greek connections. Some fringe theories even claim she's linked to the Egyptian goddess Isis, just with more hay involved. But back to Argus. He's not just some sleep-deprived eyeball creature. He's loyal, clever, and alarmingly good at his job. Zeus needs a fixer, so he sends Hermes, the god of travel thieves and late-night schemes. Hermes shows up, plays some sweet flute music, tells a bunch of weird stories, and gently lulls Argus to sleep all 100 eyes. Then, with surgical precision, Hermes removes Argus from the equation. Let's call it a divine retirement. Afterward, Hera is heartbroken, strangely enough. She collects Argus's eyes and places them on the tail of the peacock, which explains why that bird looks like it's permanently watching your every move. It's poetic and creepy in equal measure. And Io, still a cow, she keeps walking across continents. Until finally Zeus decides she's suffered enough and turns her back into a human. No apology, no magical spa day, just there, you're done now. She ends up in Egypt, becomes a queen, and allegedly gives birth to the ancestors of Heracles, because of course this loops back to Heracles. Her life, though bizarre, shapes generations of mythic heroes. You pause now, walking beside Io across a quiet plain. Her hooves are cracked. Her eyes are tired. She glances sideways at you as if to say, I was just a priestess once, and somewhere above the gods are still watching. This myth, like so many Zeus animal situations, is layered in symbolism. The cow might represent fertility, sacrifice, or helplessness, or maybe it's just what you get when a thunder god runs out of better ideas. But it's also one of the saddest. There's no seduction here. No gleaming feathers or golden sparkle. Just panic transformation and an unwilling road trip across the ancient world. You wonder if Io ever truly recovered. If being a cow for that long leaves a mark. If she flinched every time she saw grass. If she missed the way it felt to speak. And you wonder again why Zeus never learns. Why he keeps turning women into animals or turning himself into one to get what he wants. Maybe it's cowardice. Maybe it's divine impulse. Or maybe it's habit. A dangerous story-shaping habit that leaves mortals like Io carrying the consequences while Olympus carries on. As the stars rise above the plains, you think of Argus, of the peacock's tail, of hoofprints pressed into myth, and of a girl who walked the world in someone else's body just to get free. Night is falling again, and this time, you're not walking beside a river or through dry plains. You're hiding behind a tree. You're watching a cow, a very stressed cow, being watched by something far more unsettling, a giant, with a body absolutely covered in eyes. This isn't your first time seeing Argus Panopta as the all-seeing sentinel Hera chose to guard poor Io the cow. But tonight the story isn't about him. It's about Hermes and the weirdest rescue mission in Greek mythology. Zeus has been feeling guilty, or maybe just inconvenienced about Io's fate. She's still stuck in cow form, still mooing across ancient Greece like a four-legged GPS, and now she's being followed 24/7 by Argus, whose idea of subtle surveillance is glare at you from literally every square inch of his body. Zeus decides it's time to fix things. But he doesn't do it himself, of course not. He sends Hermes, the divine messenger patron of tricksters, pickpockets, and that one guy at a party who brings a flute and refuses to leave. You watch Hermes now descending the hill with a musical instrument in one hand, and a very chill smile on his face. He's not here to fight. He's here to bore Argus to sleep. which, to be fair, is not an easy task when your target has 100 eyes. So Hermes begins. He plays his flute. He sings weird lullabies. He tells long-winded stories, very long-winded stories about things like why tortoises make good instruments and this one time I stole Apollo's cows. It's the mythological equivalent of talking someone to death with niche podcast episodes. Slowly, one by one, the eyes of Argus begin to close. A few remain open because, of course they do, but Hermes is patient. He keeps playing. Keeps telling stories. Some say he even invented the panpipes during this exact moment just to kill time. And finally, all eyes shut. Hermes draws his blade, and Argus becomes one with the landscape. Historians still debate whether Argus was originally a solar deity symbolizing the ever-watchful sun, or perhaps a repurposed guardian from older myth systems. A few fringe theories connect him to Eastern mythology, suggesting the idea of a multi-eyed watchman came from even older traditions. Whatever the truth, his end marks a pivotal moment in the Io saga and in Zeus's whole animal disguise career. Because here's the thing, Zeus never deals with consequences directly. He sends someone else. He hides behind metaphors. He disguises himself as weatherbirds mammals. And when things spiral out of control, someone like Hermes has to clean up the mythological mess. But Hera, she's not about to let this one go quietly. You watch her descend draped in shadow and majesty. She gathers Argus's eyes, the only part of him left untouched, and places them on the tail of her favorite bird, the peacock. That's why peacocks shimmer with those brilliant eye patterns. Every spot a tribute or maybe a warning. It's a moment of petty beauty. Hera, in all her jealous fury, finds a way to preserve what was lost, even as Zeus pretends nothing happened. And Io, still a cow, but not for long. With Argus gone, Hermes leads her away through valleys and across borders. She crosses so many lands that her route literally names them the Ionian Sea, the Bosporus, each marking her passage like a mythic GPS. Her footsteps echo through time. Eventually, in Egypt, Zeus finally decides to restore her humanity. No ceremony, no apology. Just a quick zap of thunder magic and poof, she's Io again. Tired, changed, but Io, she becomes a queen in Egypt, possibly merging with local deity lore. Some scholars claim this is where Greek and Egyptian mythologies begin to blur. That Isis, the powerful Egyptian goddess, may have absorbed some aspects of Io's myth. Which makes sense, both wandered far, both endured transformation. Both are protectors of lineage and fertility. You watch Io now standing on a stone platform in a temple courtyard, finally upright, finally free of hooves and mooing. Her eyes still carry that distant, watchful look like someone who's spent too much time looking through another creature's face. Some part of her will never be uncowed, and somewhere far above Zeus probably thinks he's fixed everything. As if returning someone's humanity erases the trauma of losing it. But Io's story leaves a mark, literally on the map, figuratively in the stars, and narratively as one of Zeus's most complicated animal disguise disasters. Because unlike the swan or the bull, this wasn't a romance. It wasn't even a seduction, it was panic, and then cover-up, and then a long road out of the consequences. And for once, Zeus couldn't bird flap his way out of it. You're standing now in the halls of Olympus, high above mortal reach, with clouds curling around marble columns and divine light pouring in from no discernible source. Everything here feels grand, excessive, and slightly theatrical, like a palace designed by someone who has never heard the word subtle. At the center of it all sits Zeus, looking bored. He drums his fingers on a golden armrest. He's already been a bull and eagle, a swan, a rain cloud. What's left? His gaze drifts lazily down toward the mortal world where humans are building cities, praying to statues and occasionally naming salad dressings after him. And then he sees her, Antiope, a mortal princess of Thebes. Or is it Boeotia? The sources conflict naturally, either way she's beautiful. Regal. Unaware that she's about to become the next myth in Zeus's ongoing animal-themed improv show. This time Zeus opts for something casual. No elaborate disguises, no cattle cosplay. He simply transforms into a satyr. Which, to be clear, is not an animal in the traditional sense. It's a hybrid part man, part goat. With cloven hooves, little horns a penchant for bad decisions, and the personality of someone who'd hit on you at a wine tasting and not take the hint. You watch him descend to earth hooves clicking on dusty stones, eyes gleaming with a mix of divine power and mischievous chaos. He finds Antiope. And then, well, myth gets blurry again. In some versions, she's seduced, in others, tricked. In the less charitable tellings, it's not remotely consensual. That's the unfortunate frequency of these myths' power disguised as charm coercion, cloaked in transformation. Soon after Antiope discovers she's pregnant, she's driven from her home. In some stories, her father banishes her. In others, she flees to avoid Hera's wrath, because of course Zeus didn't mention this to his wife. Antiope wanders through wild terrain alone and increasingly very, very pregnant. And then because Greek mythology loves dramatic childbirths, she gives birth to twins in a field. They're named Amphion and Zethus. One becomes a poet and musician able to charm stones with his lyre. The other is a hunter and builder strong and no nonsense. Together they'll grow up to found Thebes, one of the most important cities in ancient Greek myth. You blink. Wait, Thebes. Yes, that Thebes. The one from Oedipus from Dionysus's cults, from every tragedy with too many family trees. So here we are again, another woman, another transformation, another set of legendary offspring. Zeus doesn't just dabble, he lays the mythological foundation for entire cities. Historians still argue whether the satyr disguise was symbolic, representing primal chaos, masculine wildness, or fertility gone off the rails. Some see it as a literary shift, a move from divine awe to mythological comedy. Others think the tale of Antiope was older than Zeus himself, and he got retroactively written into it like a very flashy footnote. There's a fringe theory, too, that Antiope is an older earth goddess figure, and the satyr isn't Zeus at all, but a wild, seasonal spirit later rebranded by Olympian propaganda. Which would make Zeus the mythological equivalent of someone slapping their name on a group project they barely worked on. Regardless, Antiope's life is no fairy tale. She's mistreated by relatives. In some stories, she's imprisoned. But eventually her sons now grown rescue her, avenge her suffering, and build Thebes in her honor. Which is oddly satisfying. For once, a Zeus-related myth ends with the woman not just surviving, but being honored. You imagine Antiope walking through the gates of Thebes, now a queen mother. Behind her twin sons. Before her, a city destined for greatness and tragedy in equal measure. And above, Zeus probably nods in satisfaction, already distracted by the next face in the clouds. You wonder if he remembers these women. If he thinks of Io's hooves, Leda's eggs, Danae's tower. Or if they blur together a montage of mortal encounters, each transformed into myth, and then gently erased from divine memory. The satyr form fades into the mist, now part goat, part man, all trouble. And Antiope's story joins the others. Another strange entry in the diary of a god who keeps becoming something else to get what he wants. And leaving someone else to raise the consequences. You're deep in the woods now, shaded damp and buzzing with insect song. The air is thick with pine resin and something stranger. A faint electric energy like the aftertaste of a lightning strike. And through the trees there's a flicker of movement. Not deer, not bird. It's a bear. A big one. Glossy fur, heavy paws, a glint of something unnervingly intelligent in its eyes. And yes, you've probably guessed it already. It's not just any bear. It's Callisto. She wasn't always Earth sign. Once she was a mortal maiden, a companion of Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Callisto swore a vow of chastity, followed Artemis into the wilds, and became part of a fiercely independent, all-female group of hunters who wore moonlight like perfume and could outshoot the best of them. Enter Zeus. He sees Callisto in the forest, and being Zeus, decides to insert himself into the situation in the most uncomfortable way possible. Disguised as some versions tell it as Artemis herself. Yeah, Zeus literally shapeshifts into the very goddess Callisto worships and trusts, then approaches her. What happens next depends on the version. Some say seduction. Others say trickery, and still others veer toward darker interpretations. Either way, the result is a pregnancy. And that's when things spiral. Callisto tries to hide it, but you can't exactly conceal divine consequences in a tight-knit group of moonlit huntresses. Eventually, Artemis discovers the truth. And she, fierce, vengeful, notoriously unforgiving when it comes to broken oaths, banishes Callisto. And if that wasn't enough punishment for a mortal being caught in the gods' crossfire, along comes Hera. Because, of course, she finds out Zeus has once again made celestial mischief with a mortal girl, and decides to take revenge. Not on Zeus, never Zeus, but on Callisto. So she turns her into a bear. a big, tragic, growly symbol of everything lost. Callisto roams the forest in silence, unable to speak, unable to return to the life she once knew. She gives birth to a son, Arcus, who, being a normal human baby, is very confused about his mom being covered in fur. Years pass. Arcus grows up strong and skilled, like his mother, unaware of her fate. One day, while out hunting, he comes face to face with a giant bear in the woods. They lock eyes. He raises his spear, and then divine intervention. Zeus, finally awake at the switchboard, realizes this reunion is heading toward Greek tragedy territory, and throws both of them into the sky. Literally. Callisto becomes Ursa Major the Great Bear. Arcus becomes Ursa Minor the Little Bear. That's right, the Big Dipper. That's Callisto's tail. And yes, real bears don't have tails like that. But mythological bears do, and they spin. You glance up at the stars now and trace their shape. The long ladle of Ursa Major stretching across the heavens, always visible in the northern sky. Never setting, never resting. Because Hera, still bitter, asked Oceanus and Tethys to make sure Callisto could never dip below the horizon. A bear doomed to circle forever, never sleeping beneath the waves like other constellations. Historians still argue whether this tale was originally a star myth, a way for early sky watchers to explain why Ursa Major never sets, or if it evolved from older Earth goddess traditions, later absorbed by Olympian storytelling. Some point out the bear's presence in other mythologies in Norse, Native American, even Siberian star lore. The bear is nearly universal. Perhaps Callisto predates even the Greeks. A fringe theory claims that her transformation was more metaphor than magic, that Callisto's isolation and exile turned her into a bear in the poetic sense, wild and untouchable. But the Greeks, they took it literally. You walk now through the forest imagining Callisto in both forms, the girl laughing beside Artemis and the bear roaming alone. You imagine the terror in her eyes when she sees her own son pointing a weapon at her, and the flash of starlight as Zeus intervenes. You wonder if becoming a constellation is a reward, or just another form of imprisonment, frozen in place, majestic but untouchable, spinning above a world that long forgot your voice. Somewhere far above, Zeus probably thinks he's being generous. As if turning someone into a permanent star is a good apology for turning their life into a mythological horror story. But the sky remembers, and so do we. You're not in the forest anymore. You're standing on a hill, dry grass whispering around your ankles, staring down at an empty field, and an even emptier feeling creeping in at the edges of your thoughts. It's quiet, eerily so. And then, from a distant copse of trees, you hear it, buzzing. Not bees, not flies. A strange golden hum that seems to shimmer in the air like heat waves. And walking toward you, swaying slightly, is a bull. A real one this time. You think, oh no, not again. Because yes, we are back in bull territory, and this time, the story belongs to Europa, a Phoenician princess whose name you might recognize from, well, an entire continent. The story begins with her picking flowers. It always starts innocently, doesn't it? She's on the coast gathering blooms with her friends, sun on her skin, breeze in her hair, when a strange bull appears. A white bull. Strikingly beautiful. Calm-eyed and somehow inviting. You already know who it is. Zeus. Again, this time he's taken on the form of a perfectly sculpted bull. Not wild, not snorting and stomping, but elegant. Regal. The kind of bull that wouldn't trample your flower basket. He approaches Europa gently, kneels, licks her hand, lies down beside her like a golden retriever hoping for ear scratches. She laughs, she pets him, she climbs onto his back, and that's when he bolts. Just like that, he charges toward the sea, gallops straight into the surf, and swims away with Europa clinging to his back, her flowers trailing behind her like forgotten warnings. She screams. She cries. But he doesn't stop until they reach Crete, where he reveals himself as Zeus and tells her she'll now be queen of this island. Also, she'll bear him 3 sons, one of whom will become Minos, the future king, associated with labyrinths, minotaurs, and questionable parenting choices. It's a lot to spring on someone who was literally just picking daisies. Europa doesn't go home again. In most versions, she accepts her fate. She becomes a queen, marries a local king even, raises those 3 sons, builds a legacy so influential that cartographers centuries later will name all of Europe after her. Historians still argue whether this myth represents a symbolic migration of culture from the east to the west, or if Europa was a real woman absorbed into myth like so many before her. Some believe the bull represents the Minoan bull cult, prevalent on Crete long before the classical Greeks dominated. A fringe theory even suggests Europa was originally a moon goddess with the bull as her celestial companion. But tonight she's just a girl stolen by the sea, and you can't help but think how eerily consistent Zeus's playbook is. Transform, approach, take. Just change the animal, change the setting, change the excuse. And the mortals. They adapt, they suffer, they survive. You imagine Europa now walking the beaches of Crete years later, still remembering the bull, still smelling salt in the air every time the tide rolls in. Maybe she grows to love the island. Maybe she never does. Maybe she builds sandcastles with her sons and never tells them what the ocean took from her. Maybe she never climbs anything again. You trace the story forward, her sons grow up. Rule kingdoms, start wars. One of them becomes judge of the dead in the underworld. Another founds dynasties. Europa's legacy spreads like sea foam across myth and history. But it started with a bull, a white bull on the sand, and a girl who said yes to the wrong pet. There's something uniquely sinister about this transformation. Not just because it's effective, but because it works. The bull is beautiful, charming, disarming. It's the kind of disguise that doesn't rely on speed or shock, it relies on trust. And that might be the most dangerous trick of all. You glance toward the sea now. The waves look peaceful, inviting. The same way they did to Europa, but you know better. You know Zeus is never just the sky god or the storm maker. He's also the bull. And sometimes that's the form that leaves the deepest tracks. The sea recedes behind you, a hushed memory of foam and hoofbeats. And now you find yourself in the shadows of something much taller tower walls, thick stone, and the kind of eerie silence that makes you suspect no one comes here willingly. This is a tower in Argos, and it holds a girl named Danae. And naturally it holds another version of Zeus. But first, Danae's backstory. She's the daughter of King Acrisius, a man who consults an oracle one day and gets the kind of prophecy that ruins dinner plans. Your daughter's son will kill you. So, being a rational parent with excellent coping skills, Acrisius does what any ancient king might do when faced with a troubling fate. He locks his only daughter in a bronze tower, or in some versions, a sealed underground chamber. No doors, no windows. Just one confused young woman in a glorified prison. And that's when Zeus gets interested. Because if there's one thing Zeus finds irresistible, it's a mortal woman that someone else has gone to great lengths to make completely inaccessible. Now this time he doesn't turn into a bull or a swan or a satyr, or even a talking banana. No, he turns into something even stranger. Golden rain. Yes, rain, but like rich. Zeus pours himself into Danae's chamber. Not through the door, there isn't one, but through a crack in the ceiling. In the form of shimmering gold droplets. Which raises so many questions that no amount of mythological scholarship can ever quite answer. Was it literal molten gold? A warm light suspended sparkles. Historians still argue whether this golden rain was a poetic metaphor for divine insemination, or an ancient attempt to make weather sexy. A few fringe interpretations even claim the story may reflect early fertility cults in which agricultural blessings were visualized as golden showers of life-giving essence falling from the sky. Not the weirdest cult concept, honestly. Regardless, the result is that Danae conceives a child Perseus. Yes, that Perseus. Monster Slayer, Head Chopper, Pegasus Starter Pack, Perseus. The guy who will eventually cut off Medusa's head, turn people to stone, and accidentally invent the world's most intense DIY mirror project. When King Acrisius finds out Danae has given birth, he's not thrilled. The whole point of locking her in the tower was no babies, but here she is holding a divine one, completely violating the terms and conditions of solitary confinement. So naturally he upgrades to plan B. He puts Danae and baby Perseus in a wooden chest and throws them into the sea. Lovely parenting. You imagine them now drifting across the Aegean, mother and infant, curled together in a wooden crate, waves slapping against the board's gods, watching silently from above. Eventually they wash ashore on the island of Seriphos, where they're taken in by a kindly fisherman named Dictys. There's always one good man with a net. Danae raises Perseus in quiet exile. And here's where things split again. Some stories say Zeus remains involved in their lives. Others say he disappears completely, having done his divine contribution and moved on to the next myth. Because of course he does. And Perseus grows, learns, fights monsters, kills a sea serpent, saves Andromeda, becomes the blueprint for every Greek action hero that follows. But his story begins with a girl in a locked room and a crack in the roof. You're still in that tower now. It's dim and echoing and smells faintly of metal. You look up at the ceiling trying to imagine what it would feel like to see drops of gold falling. Not coins or treasure, but something alive. A god. Choosing you. Or at least pretending to. And you wonder, did Danae have a choice? Did she pray for company for light? Or was it just another instance of Zeus bending the world into whatever shape would allow him to pass through unnoticed? So much of mythology turns on these quiet, unrecorded moments. The crack in the roof, the way gold might flicker on skin, the breath between terror and acceptance. You step out of the tower now and the light hits your face. Somewhere in the distance, Perseus is growing up, training with a sword. One day he'll return. And yes, he'll eventually fulfill the prophecy. His grandfather, King Acrisius, will die by his hand, albeit accidentally struck by a discus in a freak athletic accident. You almost laugh. Fate in Greek myth always finds a way. No tower, no chest, no golden loophole is ever enough to avoid it. Zeus meddles. Prophecies unfold. And mortals like Danae pay the price while bearing the next generation of heroes. You follow the coast. Now the path of Danae's drifting chest long behind you, as the sea murmurs against the rocks, and the wind carries the scent of salt thyme, and something just a little off. Ahead rising from the craggy coastline is a tower. Not the bronze one from before, but one steeped in shadows and the smell of cold stone. Inside waits Aegina, daughter of the river god Aesopus. And wouldn't you know it, Zeus has noticed her too. This time, though, he's feeling a bit paranoid. Maybe Hera's been giving him that look again. Maybe the other gods are whispering behind his back. Maybe he just wants a change of scenery. So he kidnaps Aegina. Yep. No animal form this time. No bull, no bird, not even decorative mist. He just swoops down, picks her up, and flies off with her to a deserted island. Casual. This island will eventually be named after her Aegina, which is still there on modern maps, nestled between Athens and the Peloponnese. But at this point in the story, it's an uninhabited speck in the sea, and Aegina is very much alone with the thunder god and no escape plan. They stay on the island. And again, the myth gets blurry depending on who's telling it. Some versions say she's wooed, others imply force. The result is the same: she becomes pregnant with Acus, a son who will grow up to be king of the island, and one of the three judges of the underworld, alongside Minos and Rhadamanthus. But while Zeus is off being a proud celestial dad, her father Aesopus is freaking out. He scours the earth and the rivers looking for his daughter. He eventually finds out Zeus is responsible and charges after him. But Zeus naturally isn't in the mood to chat, so he strikes Aesopus with thunderbolts until the river god backs off. Problem solved, at least from Zeus's perspective. But that's not the end of Aegina's troubles. Because remember, Hera, still mad, still keeping score, and when she finds out Zeus has had a child with yet another mortal, she does what any vengeful goddess with control over nature might do. She sends a plague. Not just any plague, a pestilence so brutal it wipes out the entire population of the island. Aegina is left standing among the dead, her son the only survivor. And she prays. She weeps. Maybe she even curses the gods. And Zeus, having created the problem, tries to fix it the way he always does with a shortcut. He transforms the island's ants into humans. Yes, ants. Tiny six-legged insects crawling among the roots and ruins of a dead city are suddenly turned into men. Warriors, citizens. A whole new population for Aegina's son to rule. They are called the Myrmidons, from the Greek word myrmex, meaning ant. You've probably heard of them most famously as the army led by Achilles during the Trojan War. Fierce, unbreakable, utterly loyal, and born allegedly from an island-wide case of divine pest control. Historians still argue whether this tale was a poetic way to explain a military culture's strict discipline, or a symbolic story about rebirth after devastation. Some link the Myrmidons to pre-Greek warrior cults. Others suggest it's a metaphor for the resilience of a people who repopulated after a disaster. Fringe theories. Oh, there are plenty. One proposes the ant people myth was based on an actual ant-worshipping cult. Another suggests Aegina was originally an earth goddess tied to fertility. and insects only later reshaped into a mortal princess caught in Zeus's never-ending romantic tour. You stand now at the edge of a Myrmidon training ground, rows of soldiers perfectly still waiting for orders. You can't tell if their silence is reverence or residual insect instinct. And Aegina, she becomes queen of the island bearing her name. Her son Aeacus becomes one of the wisest kings in Greek myth, so just and noble that when he dies he's chosen to judge souls in the underworld. But it all began with a kidnapping, and a plague, and ants. Aegina never asked to be an island, but her story sticks, her name etched into maps, her offspring carved into myth, and her legacy trailing through time like a line of ants marching home. And you walking slowly across her land feel the strange hum of something ancient in the soil. Not thunder, not sorrow, something smaller, but still powerful. You leave Aegina's island behind, sailing on dream-tide waves that feel warmer now, thick with stories. The stars above are starting to look familiar. Ursa Major still circling, and the constellations whisper reminders of girls, turned bears queens made from cows and golden rain that falls through prison ceilings. But don't relax just yet, because now the air changes. It smells like swans, which is not a normal sentence, but here in mythology that's rarely a red flag anymore. You're in Sparta, now city of warriors, discipline, and dramatic marriages. And here walks Leda, queen of Sparta, wife of King Tyndareus, and unwitting participant in one of Zeus's most puzzling shapeshifts. You've probably seen the painting, the swan curled close to a woman's feathers and skin, entwined like a dream caught mid-movement. But let's unravel the scene with less oil paint and more eyebrow raises. One version of the story claims Leda is bathing in a river when Zeus arrives disguised as a swan fleeing from an eagle. She sees this distressed feathered creature and does what any kind person might do, she shelters it. And that's when the swan cuddles up a bit too close. Some versions say Leda and Zeus become entwined that day. Others say Zeus simply seduces her later still in swan form. And yet another twist. Some say Zeus isn't the only one Leda is with that night, because her husband Tyndareus is also involved. Yes, on the same night, which leads to one of the strangest births in mythology. 2 eggs. That's right. Leda lays or produces 2 eggs. Inside these eggs are 4 children, and the division of paternity is where things get even more scrambled than an omelet. The 4 children are Helen, yes, that Helen of Troy, Clytemnestra, and the twin boys Castor and Pollux, also called Polydeuces. Some versions say Helen and Pollux are Zeus's divine children, while Castor and Clytemnestra are Tyndareus's mortal ones. Others flip that. Some say all 4 are Zeus's, some say none. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects foreign influence as egg births appear in older Indo-European and Near Eastern mythologies, or whether it's an allegorical mess that just became canonical because it was too weird to ignore. Fringe scholars have tried linking the egg motif to early fertility rituals or bird deity worship, but no one agrees on why Zeus needed to be a swan for this. Maybe he just really committed to the bit. Regardless, the outcome is seismic. Helen grows up to be the most beautiful woman in the world, a fact that will later cause a 10-year war and more poetic stanzas than any other figure in Greek literature. Castor and Pollux become symbols of brotherhood and bravery. One is mortal, one divine. When Castor dies, Pollux asks Zeus to let him share his immortality with his twin, resulting in them being cast into the sky as the Gemini constellation. You glance up now, yes, more stars. More proof that Zeus's antics leave traces everywhere, especially when they involve feathers. And Leda? Well, she becomes a mother of legends. But there's not much more said about her. She disappears behind the glow of her children's fame. Her encounter with Zeus preserved more in marble and paint than in written words. You wonder if anyone ever asked her how she felt about any of this. About the swan, the eggs, the divine offspring. You picture her on a quiet evening in Sparta looking up at the stars where her suns now flicker. Maybe she misses them. Maybe she wonders what life would have been like without gods and feathers and fate. Or maybe like many of the women in these stories, she simply did what she had to shelter a creature that looked fragile, only to find out it held the power of Olympus beneath its feathers. You walk now along the banks of the Eurotas River and you spot a swan gliding by. It looks innocent enough, but you know better. You're in the hills now, higher up, thinner air, the wind rushing past like whispered warnings. The stones beneath your feet are smooth and worn as if generations of sandals have climbed this slope before you. Ahead lies the sprawling valley of Dodona, an ancient place of oracles, oak trees, and voices in the rustling leaves. This is where Zeus listens, or so people once believed. But tonight we're not here for the sacred grove. We're here for Sinop, a name you might not know, but one that deserves to be remembered because for once a mortal woman outsmarts the thunder god. Yes, you heard that right. This is the story where someone actually tells Zeus no. It starts simply enough. Sinop is the daughter of the river god Aesopus. Yes, the same overworked aquatic father from Aegena's story. You start to feel bad for this guy. She's young, beautiful, and minding her own business when Zeus shows up. Again. But this time he skips the animal transformations and goes straight for the drama. He tells Sinope he will grant her any wish she desires. Anything. Power, beauty, immortality. But Sinope without hesitation replies, "I wish to remain a virgin." And here's the best part, Zeus grants it. No tricks, no loopholes. No follow-up seduction involving swans, bulls, or sneaky rainfall. He just says, okay, and leaves. You pause here halfway up the hillside and let that sink in. A moment in the Greek canon where consent is requested and respected. Scholars still puzzle over this one. Some claim it's an older Anatolian myth absorbed into the Greek tradition before Zeus got his usual reputation. Others say it reflects a different kind of divine story, one where a mortal woman's agency wasn't just a footnote. Fringe theories suggest Sinope might represent an earlier goddess archetype, one who couldn't be touched literally or metaphorically. That this wasn't about virginity as purity, but about power. Autonomy. A kind of divine immunity. Whatever the case, she gets what she wants. No tragic twist, no divine punishment, no exilins or celestial exile. She later appears in other myths sometimes associated with the founding of the city, that now bears her name Sinop on the Black Sea coast, a place where even centuries later, travelers claim to hear the wind speak through the trees, echoing the kind of silence that only follows a powerful no. You sit now beside one of those trees, the bark dry and ancient beneath your fingertips. The wind rustles the leaves above, and for a moment it almost sounds like applause. Because let's be honest, Sinope earned it. She didn't slay a monster. She didn't found a city or birth a hero. She didn't climb into a chest or survive a thunderbolt. She simply told the most powerful god in Olympus that she had other plans. And he listened. That's rare in these stories. You wonder what her life looked like afterward. If she walked through her city with her head held high. If she smiled to herself whenever thunder rolled in the distance. If she ever told her tale to daughters or granddaughters, I was asked and I chose. There's something profoundly restful about that. A story where a woman isn't turned into anything. Doesn't become a constellation or a tree or a lesson in tragedy. She remains exactly what she was because that's what she wanted. You rise from the hillside now, wine tugging gently at your sleeve. Sinop fades into the folds of myth, quieter than the others. No epic battles, no monster lineage. Just a wish. And a god who for once respected it. And somehow that makes her stand out even more. You walk slowly now, the hills behind you, the stars above familiar in their slow rotation. Everything feels quieter, softer. Like the gods are catching their breath. Or maybe it's just you finally beginning to understand the pattern in Zeus's chaotic symphony. But there's one more step on this journey. One last transformation to examine. And this time it's not a swan or a shower of gold. It's something even more absurd. An eagle. Because of course. But first meet Ganymede, a Trojan prince. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. Young. Radiant. The kind of beauty that made poets sigh and statues immortalize his cheekbones. He was tending sheep on Mount Ida minding his own business when Zeus spotted him, and decided he needed a new cupbearer. Now in Olympus, a cupbearer wasn't just a glorified waiter. It was an honored position, someone who poured nectar for the gods, stood by during divine banquets, maybe even heard secrets between sips. Previously, this role belonged to Hebe, goddess of youth, but Zeus sees Ganymede and makes a different kind of decision. So he turns into an eagle giant, golden feathered wings, slicing through the sky like knives and swoops down, grabs Ganymede, and flies off to Olympus. Just like that. One minute the boy is pouring water for sheep, the next he's pouring ambrosia for immortals. The myths vary here, as they always do. Some say Ganymede was terrified. Others say he was honored. Some later poets frame their relationship as romantic, some as exploitative, some as symbolic of the sky embracing the earth. Historians still argue whether the myth is a reflection of ancient Greek pederastic customs, where mentorship and attraction between adult men and young boys were a normalized, if controversial, part of aristocratic culture. Others see it as a later attempt to give divine sanction to mortal behaviors. Still others interpret it as a metaphor, the soul being lifted from earth to heaven. Fringe theories swirl around Ganymede like mist. Some suggest he was originally a sky god, in his own right later demoted and absorbed into Zeus' story. Others claim the eagle wasn't Zeus at all, but an earlier divine servant, now folded into Olympian branding. Either way, Ganymede ends up in the clouds. He becomes immortal. He serves nectar. He stares into the eyes of thunder and learns not to flinch. Hera, predictably, is not thrilled. She resents his presence, his beauty. The fact that Zeus has literally displaced a goddess for a mortal boy, but she's outvoted. Eventually, Ganymede is given a place in the sky because, of course, where he becomes the constellation Aquarius, the water bearer. You can see him now just over the southern horizon. A boy with a jar forever pouring water into the heavens, a symbol of youth and storms and sacrifice. You wonder what he's thinking. Does he miss his home? His sheep? The sun-warmed grass beneath his feet? Does he ever wish Zeus had simply let him be? Or did he find some strange peace in the stars? There's a solemnity to Ganymede's myth. It doesn't have the monstrous births of Danae, the tragic exile of Callisto, or the cosmic fallout of Europa. But there's a stillness to it, a quiet question at its core. What happens when you're chosen by a god not for your deeds but for your face? You step back from the edge now. The sky has changed. It's fuller. You've met the bears, the bull, the swan, the satyr, the eagle. You've walked through towers and temples, stood in rivers, and followed golden trails across marble floors. You've seen how Zeus kept turning into animals. And you've seen the consequences. Some of them are constellations. Some are kings. Some are broken women and forgotten myths. And some are just questions that linger like thunder rumbling on a clear day. Now everything slows. The gods fall silent. The stars hold their breath. And the air around you becomes still, like the moment before a page is turned in a story you already know the end of. The women you've met tonight, Ioleda Callisto, Danae Europa, fade gently into the distance. You don't need to remember all the details, just the sense of them, their voices, their strength, the shapes they became, and the myths they left behind. Let it all soften now. Let the thunder fade to a distant hum. Let the feathers fall from the sky and settle softly on your shoulders. You're back where you began, wrapped in quiet, floating in the kind of stillness that only comes after too many questions and not quite enough answers. And that's okay. The gods will keep their secrets. The stars will keep spinning. And you clever, weary starlet, you can finally rest. Let your eyes drift closed. Let the shapes of bulls and swans and constellations dissolve into the dark behind your eyelids. You're safe here. No transformations tonight. Just sleep, soft and slow like golden rain across your skin. Sweet dreams.
you